This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
This podcast was supported in part by grant funding from the U.S. Department of Education's Title IX grant program through the University of Illinois Center for Global Studies. The content of this program does not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 4 of Climify, where this season we want to help change the system. In this second series, we're going to be focusing on the commercial segment. Our experts in this area are focused on how our collective system is organized. We're not talking about decisions like which produce to pick at the grocery store, although these lifestyle choices are very important. Our four guests play pivotal roles in the organization of our society, disrupting the economy at the institutional level and changing how products are imagined and created. The show format is a tad different this season. Each episode is broken into 3 segments. To begin, I'll be joined by one of our researchers on Climify to break down what we both heard in my interview with our guest and what you should listen for. Our second segment is, of course, our interview, which is always still hopeful with plenty of inspiration. And finally, our third segment breaks down what we heard as calls for action in the interview itself and what you can do to change the system through climate action. Welcome to another episode of Climify, where today we have an amazing guest from Australia who's working in sustainable stage design, and that's Tanya Bear. But before we get to her, Jacqui, welcome back to Climify. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm back again and to talk about such another fun guest. I am so excited that we have such fun guests because Tanya has so much creativity to share with all of us. Tanya has more than 20 years of professional experience by creating over 70 designs of different stage designs, theater events, festivals, you name it. She's done it. But as of currently, she's an ecological designer and community artist as a senior lecturer in design at the Queensland College of Art and Design's Griffith University in Australia.
Tanya is like, in terms of all 4 seasons of Climify, she's doing things that I haven't had a guest do before. So
Mhm.
this was pretty exciting to learn more about. And one of the things that drew me to her work while talking to her was just the overlap that she and I had in our careers, in terms of we're living in different parts of the world, but we're experiencing the same thing, and we're on that kind of similar path. So that was great to learn about in terms of her upbringing. And I know that was one of your key things that you were interested in, was Tanya's background.
Yeah, as you'll hear in the story, I won't spoil it, but she has an origin story. She will tell you all in the episode how she can pinpoint where her inspiration and love for stage design and theater started.
Hmm.
And not everybody can pinpoint it. I know I can't really pinpoint it exactly when I fell in love with environmental sustainability, but she can. And there's also a moment where she says the Pandora box opened for her about
Hmm.
realizing that one of her passions that she loves so dearly was not sustainable or friendly to the environment, which I'm
Yeah.
sure was not a very easy thing to have to realize.
Now you need that sort of tension in every great superhero origin story. And yeah, so that was good that it was there, because I think it really pushed her to what she's doing now.
Yeah, it was a very pivotal moment, which led her to do some really great projects that you're going to hear about. One is the living stage. I can't even begin to describe how fun and intricate and full of life this project was.
Hmm.
And I will let her describe all the fun details. There's just so many layers to it. And when I was researching it, it just got better and better the more that I found
Yeah.
out about it.
Yeah, the stuff that she's doing now with that, I think it was somewhere in Asia, that was super exciting and
Yeah.
something to pay attention to.
Yeah, and she also is really cool because she created and started her own field of study called ecocenography, which combines her two loves, the environment and set design.
Yeah.
Uh, and she founded it, she created it, and she coined the term. Uh, just another amazing, creative, inspiring thing that Tanya does.
Yeah. And as this season is about changing the system, I mean, she's changing it by just creating her own, right?
Yeah.
And she does do a good job too in talking about changing the system from within, which is something that I try to do a lot in
Mhm.
my work. And she has some very important points about that. And that's, I think, another thing to listen for in the conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say, and I'm excited to see everybody hopefully's reaction to it. 'Cause like I said, she takes set design by storm.
She
And
does. She
yeah.
does. And without further ado, Tanya Bear. Well, hello, Tanya. Thanks for joining me today on Climify from Down Under in Australia.
Thanks, Eric. I'm very excited to be joining you.
And I'm excited that you are here and to talk more about what you're doing in the world of theater and stage design and sustainability. And I'm really curious about how you got started there in that world, and when did sustainability and theater and stage design merge for you?
That's a really good question. I think I've always been passionate about social and ecological issues for as long as I can remember. I was really privileged to have a family that was really excited about showing me nature from a very early age, going out into the bush and experiencing
Mm,
nature from as long as I can remember. Nature has always been one of those things that is a big part of my life. And in terms of stage design, I think culture and nature have been intertwined since an early age. My parents loved go out into nature and do a good bushwalk. And at the same time, they also took me to the theatre at a very young age. So I remember very distinctly at age 7 going to see opera with my parents. And I think it might be important to note that my family is Austrian.
Austrian.
And yes, not well, this is the thing, I'm an Austrian Australian, so it can confuse people at times. But I grew up in a very culturally interested family,
Yeah.
and so we would go to opera. Opera is a big part of Austrian, culture. We would go to opera in Australia, and I was only 7 years old, and it would be quite late at night, so but it was still cheaper than my parents getting a babysitter. So they thought, "Well, we might as well get her a ticket to the opera,
Some culture.
and that way she gets in, gets the culture as well." And I remember distinctly it was quite late. So for me to go through a whole 3-hour opera at age 7, an opera, the opera would end at about 11 o'clock at night. This is way beyond my bedtime. So I would often sort of settle in to have a sleep during the show, but I would distinctly ask my mum to wake me up when the set changed. And
Interesting.
she had these old little opera glasses that that she had inherited, I think, from my father's family. And I would put on the opera glasses and I would look at the set design and the costume and be very excited about what I was seeing. And then I would hand the opera glasses back to my mum and say, "Okay, thank you." And then I would go back and settle back into sleeping mode. And then mum would sort of tap me on the shoulder and say, "The set changed again." And then I would put the opera glasses on.
How old
So
were you?
that's kind of,
Yeah,
I was so 7 or 8 years old.
7 or 8.
And so I think that's where it all started, really. I also was in theatre performing at a young age. I did ballet classes. I was always really interested in dance and theatre. I wasn't particularly great at acting, but I loved being in that community. I love the stories that were told through performance. And I've always been I suppose, very interested in storytelling.
Mhm.
I loved stories as a child and I still love stories. And stories being acted out or being told to me or read to me as a child was some of my favorite moments with my parents. So I think that's
Wow.
kind of where it all started. merging it together took a little bit more time. Bringing
Yeah.
the sustainability side to stage design took some more time, but it's always been there, I suppose. I think it was always a matter of time for those things to co-emerge with one another.
Yeah. Was there like a moment or something you saw or read where you started that connection, realizing there was a negative impact to a lot of stage design?
I think there were many moments. I think it was cumulative in the sense that there wasn't one single moment where I said, "That's it. That's where, things changed for me." I think there were things like Inconvenient Truth that came out.
Mm,
I think it was a significant moment in the early 2000s that many people remember, where we suddenly were faced with the consequences of climate change and
yeah.
thinking about what that meant for us as individuals in our own lives and in our own practices. So I think that was certainly a trigger. My husband is an ecologist and he works on endangered species of frogs and other reptiles and amphibians.
He's a big
And
influence.
yes, he is. He is. And I think seeing biodiversity loss in action in the work that he does and seeing how the effects of urbanization and landfills can also, creep into habitat and thinking about the waste of my set design and how they can also and then the need to create more landfill sites that take frog habitat away was also something that really my work and his work kind of were suddenly colliding in certain moments of his work. And so I think those sort of things started to come into play in terms of how I thought about my own work and my relationship with the environment and thinking, well, in my daily life, I do try to be a good eco citizen as best I can. I am eco aware in my own practices, in my own life. But then when I walked into the theatre, somehow the theatre gave me a license to do the things that I wouldn't do at home. And so that there was sort of like this other set of rules for theatre practice. And I sort of thought to myself at some point, this has got to change because I'm becoming increasingly uncomfortable with this. And it was, I think a key moment was when I went into working as an exhibition designer at a major museum in Australia, the Melbourne Museum. It was my first time as an exhibition designer. And they had just brought in a sustainability policy. And part of my job was to engage and look into sustainability products and ways to mitigate waste and toxicity in exhibition design. And that for me was opening up a Pandora's box and not being able to look
Yeah.
back because suddenly I knew the consequences of design practices. And I started to think, well, if we're doing it in exhibition design, why aren't we doing it in theatre design? And then I remember the time where I was Googling on the web sustainability and stage design and was really absolutely dismayed at the lack of information that came back. This was about 2009,
Yeah.
and there was hardly anyone talking about it. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is amazing. It's being talked about in architecture, product design, interior design, and fashion for a long time. And what's going on in theatre? There's a gaping hole when it comes to,
Mhm.
you know, sustainability practices and even discussions on this topic. So that really prompted me to start my PhD. So that was actually when I thought this would make a good PhD topic because I needed the time to go in and investigate it.
So you and I have very similar paths then, because graphic design was what my field was. And I was looking for the same things you were, but in theater design, and it just wasn't there. And that prompted me to go to grad school. So that's
Oh, there you go.
yeah. So we have this similar path here. And I'm wondering, how open were people in the scenic design world or theater design to your ideas when you started bringing them there?
I would say not very open at all. I think that I could have counted the eco focused people on one hand when I first started, in terms of people that were at least talking about it somewhere. I suppose, in the digital space, because we were all coming from different countries as well. There was no one in Australia really talking about it at the time. And I was looking for people in the global sense of who was exploring this. And I think, it was absolutely just a handful of people that were really talking about this. So it was very, very early beginnings. And I remember when I first started talking to people, there was a lot of resistance, I would say,
Yeah.
because it all felt like it was too hard and it was going to be a limitation on aesthetics. It was going to be too expensive. Nobody had training in sustainability. To be a stage designer and to train as a stage designer, sustainability was not part of stage design education. It's still only very slowly coming into stage design education now. So people didn't really know what it meant and how that was going to impact practices. And it also felt for them, I think that, there's all these bigger industries out there, and stage design in theatre is so small. Our impact is already so minor. And also, we recycle a lot anyway. So
Hmm.
there was a lot of kind of, yeah, coming back in with those kind of comments. So it was pushing against some of those assumptions
Yeah. Yeah. That
that when I
system,
first
right? Because
started.
that's what the season is about, is changing the system. And I'm curious about, based on your experiences, trying to change the theater to one that's less of a carbon footprint, more sustainable. How would you encourage others to challenge the systems that they're in based on what you've done?
I think it's really important to note that it is challenging, it is hard. And in terms of changing the system from within, it's also got a lot to do with power and
Yeah.
how much agency you have. And if
Mhm.
you are an emerging designer working for a bigger theatre company for the first time, there's a lot riding on that, and you may not feel like you have the agency to speak up. If you are an established designer, you have far more power in that relationship. And you might even be hired. I mean, now I think it's different, but back then, certainly I was not hired for my eco credentials. I was hired as a stage designer. And I think we're getting to a point now in some circles where a stage designer might be hired for their their eco creativity, their eco credentials alongside their work as a stage designer more generally. But I think when you're working in a very traditional setup, sometimes you have to really think about how you're going to approach that. And for everyone, it's a bit different. If you're somebody who's not afraid of confrontation, who feels that it's natural to speak up, then perhaps you are feeling more comfortable with talking about how you feel about a certain decision being made. But if you're a shyer person who is not very wants to shy away from confrontation, that can be quite hard and quite nerve-wracking. So sometimes the changing from within happens more subtly. It happens by not reprimanding others. And I think being actually generous about who you're collaborating with. And in stage design, it's such a collaborative process. So there's so many people on board. And I think it's really important that you're not shaming someone for not having
Mhm.
the sustainability outlook or the sustainability knowledge. So it's important that you're coming in gently, that you're showing what is possible, that you're working together with some of the people that might be building your designs or creating your costumes, and you co-create with them. You co-create that change with them, and you show what is possible, and you get them excited. And I think that's the other thing. If you frame it around eco-efficiencies, if you frame it around, the challenges, then it's much harder to get people excited and on board. But if you
Yeah.
change it, or if you challenge, those assumptions by focusing on eco creative ideas, make them excited about using new products and new materials with the production manager or the technical director, who often is, managing the budget. I will often frame things through a lens of, the budget, that it is
Yeah.
basically cheaper to do certain things. Yeah, I'll find different tactics. It's can be quite tactical, to be honest. So, certainly in the early days when I didn't have I would say that I had very little agency. I had
Yeah.
to find very creative ways to get people engaged. And sometimes I did not succeed at all. And I had to then reflect on the fact that I could have pushed a little bit harder in some areas. And that's always a learning. That's always a learning as you go through the process.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I'm wondering, staying on that topic for a second, what kind of external forces outside of the theater world, that theater system, could have helped you make that move faster? And I'm thinking like policy or regulation.
Policy is so significant. We don't at the moment have a cultural policy in this country that includes sustainability as part of it. There are very little theatre organisations that actually have a green policy or a green framework or a commitment to sustainability. So if you're coming in as a designer, it's very hard because
Mm.
everything then potentially is on your back to then pursue by yourself potentially if no one else
Yeah.
is interested. So those policy changes are significant, absolutely. And if you work with a theatre company, and there are more and more happening now that theatre organisations actually are making commitments where designers come on board and they have to sign contracts that basically said, yes, I agree with the sustainability focus of this theatre organisation and I will do my best to work within that. We will get there, I think, soon enough where that will just become part of design contracts, but we're still a way away from that at the moment. So if we have a strong leader, the artistic director of a theatre company that is passionate about this topic, that will also be significant because
Yeah.
then the employment of designers and the designers that are being chosen to work on these shows will also influence how those decisions get made around who should be the designer in this season. I really hope that sooner rather than later, we will see designers getting employed because they have the sustainability credentials behind them,
Yeah, me too.
as well as the work that they do. And I can see that already in parts of the world like the UK, that is already happening.
Oh,
And I think I would say that I did my first show more recently back in conventional theatre where I was actually contracted as both the eco-sonographer and the, I suppose, stage designer in one.
well, you are great at transitions, because one of the things that we are very excited to talk to you about is are a couple of your projects, right? First, and correct my pronunciation here, Ecoscenography. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes,
A-
eco-sympathy.
okay, yeah, we want to talk about that with you, and the Living Stage project. So you were the creator of Ecoscenography. You created that term, and can you describe what that is? Define it for us, because I know I've not heard of it before, and it's kind of exciting to know that it exists.
Yes, thank you. So I suppose it might be worth unpacking what sonography is because it's not necessarily a term that everyone knows in the design world. Certainly, it gets used more in the European context, I would say, than in the North American or Australian context. Sonography is basically the crafting of stage worlds,
Mm,
or it's another word for stage design. We use it more in a research context. We can sort of talk about it as the study of stage design. And when I was first doing my PhD, I was talking a lot about ecological design for performance, and it was a bit of a mouthful because I was very much specifically looking at the context of sustainability for performance design. And and then I thought, well, it's very easy if I use the term sonography, which is interchangeable with performance design in my field, then I attach the eco word to sonography and eco sonography kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. And we can really then define what that is for our field. So ecosonography is basically bringing an ecological focus to stage design. I use the term ecological rather than sustainable stage design because I'm interested in ecological worldviews and the way in which we look at the world in a relational way. And ecology is all about relationships.
yeah.
And to me, ecology is perhaps more in line with how I feel about sustainability. It's more around circular systems. It's more around thinking about place and the interconnectedness of place and how that also becomes part of our design process. It's more holistic than sustainability for me. For sustainability, I think there's a bit of a limitation to sustainability as a term. it's a difficult term in times because we can sort of start, what do we mean by sustainability?
Yeah. Yeah, I
When
agree.
I feel like we need thrivability, not
Right.
sustainability.
Yeah.
Sustainability as a term is what it is. It is something that is understood by many people as slightly different ideas around that term. But ecological to me is, yeah, it brings more with it, I suppose. It's more inspiring as a starting point, I think, because I'm interested more in thrivability than sustainability.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that term before, thrivability.
Yeah, it's a big part of how I see ecoscenography. So one of the things about ecoscenography is it looks at sustainability through a lens of opportunity rather than a lens of scarcity. It's looking at the world through a lens of abundance and how we design from
Mm.
that. So that's super different to maybe starting to think about, mitigation of waste and impact and measurement and all of those things, which we might describe academically as a mechanistic worldview or kind of mechanistic systems that can help us with sustainability. All of those things are really worthwhile, and all of those things have a contribution to make. But I think we need to also be moving beyond that. I think we also need to think about not only mitigating waste and impact, but also how can we give back? How can we contribute to our communities, our more than
Yeah.
human communities? And that's what inspires me more than just the mitigation of waste and impact. So for me, ecoscenography is really coming from that place of abundance. It is about responding to place as the first point of call. It's about thinking through an ecological aesthetic lens, which means basically, how can we consider something to be beautiful if it ultimately degrades living systems?
Mhm.
So reframes what we mean by aesthetics. Yeah, I think they're the main part. And it's
Yeah.
about relationality. And I think it's something that's sustainable in Australia, sort of certain materials and products that I might use in Australia that might be good choices from a sustainability perspective may not be good choices in America. So, or in parts of Europe. So
Right.
I
It's
think
regional, right?
it's really regional and it's really
Yeah.
local. So I think it's not like this product is bad, yeah, and this product is good. It's much more complex than that. And I think when we look at ecology and how we think about ecology, even as a science, it's very complex and it is also very place based. And that's sort of the spirit that comes with the sustainability angle of ecosonography.
Well, you used a phrase that I absolutely love, and that is more than human. And last season, I spoke with an Apache scholar, Melinda Adams, here. She's at the University of Kansas, and she talked about her more than human friends and what we can learn from them. You described ecosonography as a greater understanding and appreciation of the world. And I want to hear more about how that has helped you better understand theater and then the world that we live in outside of theater.
I think for me, my inspiration behind why I love theatre so much is really at its root of being about storytelling and humans sharing space together to tell stories together. That's basically what the first theatres that our ancestors experienced were probably around a fire with there would have been probably some scenography, some very basic scenography. There would have been costume, there would have been stories, there would have been music. And most of those stories, as far as I can tell, and if we look at Indigenous societies now, we can see some of that still there, So we've lost that a lot in Western society. We've sort of changed the way that theatre is thought about. But if we go back to the basics, those stories that were told around the fire were often ecological stories, and they were told in an ecological way. They were about stories around our relationship to the environment and to each other. And that relationality was key to appreciating and understanding our position within it. And we were so reliant and dependent on the environment and the local ecology for our survival. And so that was key to part of the storytelling. So I think for me, ecosonography philosophically is about reconnecting to those roots that we all have and that we all share as humans. And it takes a lot of inspiration from Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous, artists who still hold those values and those ways of making theatre with them, even in a more contemporary context. So that idea of understanding our relationality with nature and how those stories help us to understand nature better, but also if we're working with natural materials or we're working better with place. And so for me, ecocenography is place based. It all starts with where we are here now as the first point of call. That to me is very much in that sort of looking at the world for inspiration. It's not saying I'm coming up with a preconceived idea for a design. I'm actually allowing place to talk to me, place to reveal itself to me about what is possible. I'm looking at the world with fresh eyes. And it's sort of like the magpie. We talk about it sometimes as the magpie sonographer or the magpie designer that is going through the world, finding things from the side of the road or, things that are kind of in my local community that are almost sort of asking to be used or asking to be explored in a new way. So it is about that heightened sensibility of serendipitous opportunity. Serendipity is a big part of that, is allowing what is around you to spark the idea. And that is going really beyond some traditional ideas of how stage design is being done, which is I read the play, I come up with this idea in my head for the play, and then I implement it. And most of the time in collaboration with the director. In this context, I might read the play and then I might think, oh, I have some ideas of what this could be, but let's go out into nature. Let's go out into the urban fabric. Let's talk to community groups. What are the materials that I might be able to use that could inspire this design? So that relationality allows you to reconnect with the world around you, both in the community and the environment, and then thinking through those choices. What does it mean when I use this material? How does it affect, what's going to happen to it afterward?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, I wish I could have experienced a production like that in theater. And then I thought, wait, I did. And I work with a great performance artist named Deke Weaver, who has this project. He calls it his like lifelong project of the unreliable bestiary. And he goes out into a space, and it takes him years to do this. And then you experience that space around a cause. And it's usually some animal that is on the endangered species list. So I have to say it's amazing. Like that idea is amazing and there should be more of it.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much potential, I think, in finding different ways of connecting with the world around us is something that we've lost a little bit. I think through the rise of digital technology as well, there can be this disconnect
Yeah.
with with understanding the world
Totally
around us
agree.
and the kind of symbiotic relationship that we have with it.
So I'm guessing all of this is the inspiration for one of your more celebrated projects, which is the living stage. Can you talk more about that? Because it sounds amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. The living stage really came from all of the things that I've been talking about before around notions of opportunity and serendipitous design processes. The living stage is a recyclable, biodegradable, edible, biodiverse performance space that combines community engagement, horticulture, and stage
Did you
design.
say edible?
Yes, yes, that's
Oh my
the
gosh.
main
I'm
part
in.
of
I'm in.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. It basically brings the fun factor to the fore. So the living stage works like this. We grow the stage with the local community. We invite the community to come and perform on the stage, and then we eat the stage. And it's
No
all
way.
about making sustainability fun and engaging to everyone. It's very inclusive, community focused. It's really about giving back to the community and the environment as well. So it's kind of coming from this notion of positive legacies. It's how can I not only create a beautiful design, but how can that design also contribute back to the more than human communities of which it is part?
That's lovely.
So, and fun. It has to be fun, and
It's fun.
that's
Yeah.
really at the heart of ecocenography is also this notion of fun. You know, we are dealing with a topic of sustainability and climate change that is often very debilitating and very depressing and anxiety ridden. We can sometimes feel like we're a deer in the headlights when we're talking about climate change and feel hopeless
Yeah.
within that. And so for me, living stage is an antidote to that. It is basically saying, let's do what we can in the place in where we are. And it's great. I think it has so many. It's not only an ecological benefit, which is what we aim to have. It's very much a psychological benefit to the community because it's so hands on. And I think in when we talk about climate change, we can feel so, as I mentioned before, helpless in that big looming issue. And if we work locally, hands on processes can be a way to come to terms with that
Mm.
and to tell stories around it. Again, it goes back to the idea of us as a species celebrating and talking and dancing our stories within the community. And that's what that really is about.
So it sounds like the community really did come together to support this project. What was the feedback you heard from that? It looks like the first one you did was in 2013 at the Castlemaine State Festival. What was the reaction to that?
It was amazing, and I think it was the first one, so it was very scary, and when I pitched it to the festival, I pitched it to a few different festivals and a few different producers, and I think most of them had no idea what I was trying to do. So for them, I think for most people, they were saying, "Yeah, no, I'm not really sure what you're doing, what you want to do here." And the Castlemaine State Festival was very progressive as a festival. It's very regional, so it's in a regional area outside of Melbourne. And it's got a very strong grassroots community and already has quite a strong permaculture scene in terms of people working with planting and and gardening. So it's also got a very strong artistic scene. So it was a good place to test it because I think the community there were already on board. And so when you're trying something new, it's really helpful to have, yeah, a group of people that understand what you're trying to do. And I co-designed this with two permaculturists. So they were the plant experts of that region. And so, there's a lot of plants. There's hundreds of plants that make up this stage, and they're all grown on site with the community. So having a permaculture designer or a plant or person is really important to making that work thrive. And I am not a gardening person. So, and I'm actually not really great with plants, which is the irony of this whole
Oh my
thing.
gosh. I was going to ask about
Um,
how did you get all this to grow? Do you have a background? But I guess not.
no, I just brought in the people that are the green thumbs. You need, we had lots of people with green thumbs. I had an artist who's also a permaculturist who was also a plant whisperer. I would call him the plant whisperer because he could just put his hand in the soil and know what the plant needs.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
thought to myself, that is amazing. That's a superpower that really needs to be acknowledged more. So he really understood how he really we had to do the timing of it, obviously, over months. Everything had to go towards opening night. So everything was geared toward this opening. It's part of the festival. And we had to plan everything out really rigorously in terms of knowing when everything would flower and bloom so it would be ready for opening. The thing is that you can't, this is the big learning that I had on the first living stage is that you cannot ask a sunflower to bloom
Mm,
on opening
hmm.
night. The sunflower is going to bloom when it wants to bloom. And
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want to get the flower ready in time, but the sunflower is going to do what the sunflower is going to do.
Yeah.
And which is very different to other, a performer or a stage design process. So yes, the sunflowers did actually flower a little early.
Oh, that's great.
So we had, they weren't in the bloom moment that we wanted for opening, but it's quite interesting how there was a letting go of me as a designer to go, I've got to just let nature do its thing too, and just accept that what's going to happen is going to happen. So I have to let go of that full, you know, s- creative license or aesthetic idea that I have in my head because I'm working with nature. I'm working with
Right.
nature in this context, and it is a collaboration.
Collaborator with plant.
Yes,
I love
and
it.
they are the stars of the show.
They are. Yeah.
They
Was
are
the
the
plant
stars of the
whisperer
show.
involved in this in some way? Did he get the
Yes.
sunflowers to?
Yeah, well, we actually played around with some ideas of sort of, making sure that they, how often we were watering them, all of this stuff. But yeah, it's so hard. It's difficult. That's very scientific, really, about those things. And yeah, I don't know. That's a level
Well,
of
I've
science
read a few
that's beyond
things.
us.
When did I find this? It was a couple years ago, just about like music and plants or talking to your plants. Cause we had this big plant in our house we called Frank. And I talked to Frank every day when I watered him and in hopes that he would grow. So I mean, there was some science behind that.
Oh, absolutely. I think we know so little about how plants feel and what goes on with
Yeah.
plants. There's still a lot of science that is being done in that space around. Yeah, there's still so little that we know about them. And I do feel that there was so much love around this garden. I have to say those plants were so well looked after and so loved, and they looked like they were loved. It was very clear. Um, and I think it was a really good example of how, in a small, tiny little project, in a tiny part of the world, you can show that love for nature
Mm,
in a
mhm.
really strong way, and how that can be visibly celebrated. There were lots of different performances on the stage by the local community, and primary school were there. We had a cook-off with some chefs. They had to use local ingredients from the
That's
garden.
wonderful.
There was a mixed ability performance, which where they activated the set. They actually responded to the living stage as part of their show. It was different to normally it's the design is created around the narrative of the show. In this case, it was they created the narrative for the design. So they actually were responding to the living stage. And
Yeah,
then the
you met
whole idea is that you are circulating everything back into the community. So after the living stage is over, basically everything is then distributed. All the plants are then distributed to community gardens for further reuse. Whatever is not distributed out is generally composted.
mm,
Um, so most of it is biodegradable, and some of it might be then brought into the community for reuse. But the whole idea is it's waste free.
that's wonderful. And you mentioned children, and I was thinking as you're talking, this is the perfect thing to teach kids about the world where I mean, you and I think both grew up in nature. I was like, my parents just sent me in the backyard when I was young, and I explored the world that way. And I see less and less children doing that, and I think that this is a good opportunity for them to learn more about it. And I'm wondering what your hopes are for the living stage in terms of how it can inspire future theater productions or even in movies.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought of movies. I think for me, what I like about the living stage, we've done, how many have we done? We've done 8 of them now. They're always specific to site and community, which means no living stage is ever the same. That's part of the beauty of it. So we've done living stages all over the world, in Australia, UK. We've done a living stage in New York. And they all look so different, and all the communities around them are so different. Often children are involved. I think in pretty much in every living stage that we've done, children are part of the co-creation in the sense that they are part of the planting process and the performance. We actually
Right.
did a dedicated living stage for primary school children, and the primary school children were also the planters of that stage. And it then traveled, it was in Glasgow, and it traveled around different primary schools in Glasgow. And I think one of the key moments for me was when we interviewed the kids about what they enjoyed the most about the process. These were the children that had helped grow the living stage. We had professional actors coming in to create the work, and then that was the professional piece was touring around. And I loved it because what happened was in the interviews, one girl said, "It's like I'm famous. I've like planted all this stuff and now it's going all over the world."
Yeah, that's
And
true.
yeah, she would have been about 10 years old.
Mhm.
And I just thought how amazing that, what a great thing to think about being famous for. I think for them, it was other kids were saying, "I'm so excited that other kids are going to see my plants on stage." And it was about their contribution to the world beyond the school walls, that
Yeah,
they felt as children they had made a contribution. And that's the sort of stuff that just sticks with you, I
yeah.
think, in
That's the
your
best teachable moment right there.
exactly. It was amazing. And it was for me, I had thought other things that they would talk about. I didn't realize that they would actually talk about that. I thought they might talk about how they enjoyed the gardening or they enjoyed the art activities or they liked the show, but it was about them wanting to contribute.
Yeah.
And that was a moment where I said, yeah, everybody wants to contribute. Everyone's looking for
Mhm.
opportunity to contribute. Generally, that is what also drives us and makes us feel valuable in society. And even young children between the age of 9 and 11 feel that
They
and
do.
want to be part of society in some way. That's something that drives them as well. In terms of the future of the living stage, I would love to do more living stage all over the world because it would be exciting to see one in Asia. It'd be exciting to see one in Central Europe because they would all look so different
It
and
would.
involve different kinds of communities. The I hope that in traditional theatre we can learn a bit more about the living stage through its more circular framework. Even if we work in indoor spaces, we don't necessarily want to work with plants in indoor spaces, but that we learn from living stage in terms of its community integration and its desire to give back to the environment and community. So it'd be interesting to see how that might translate. The next living stage that I'm doing is in Singapore.
Oh,
It's a different
congratulations.
kind of living stage.
Yeah,
It is a microbial living stage.
microbial.
Not I'm not working with plants, I'm working with microbes.
How does that work?
It's called so this is called this is the living stage with a twist.
It sounds like
It is a new production by Theatre Practice in Singapore, a theatre company in Singapore, working with an amazing artist called Xiao Ting, who is an environmental theatre maker. And the work is called Pickle Party, and it's all about pickling and actually co-creating with microbes. So it's much more it's happening more on a microbial level. It's
yes.
really like this is definitely out there in terms of something I have never done this before, but it is a living stage, but with a
Can
difference.
you see them from where you're sitting, like, as a in the audience?
We can send definitely the audience is also doing the pickling.
Okay,
The
okay, no,
pickles
that's
will
cool.
be on stage, right? The pickles will be on stage, the kombuchas will be on stage, any kind of fermented produce will be on stage. But I think we'll probably be working with a microbiologist to actually then be able to see what's going on there at a microbial level and probably project that as part of like the digital side of the work.
Well, I think I need to get you to Illinois then, where I am, because I collaborate with plants here from an agricultural perspective in the paper I make. So I'd be interested to see what you could do here with corn and soybeans because that prairie grass too. So
Oh my God, that would be
that's
amazing.
yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. This sounds like something I need to look into because I don't know, like the idea of microbes. That's I would never have thought of that.
I hadn't have thought of that until this opportunity came up. And then I realized that this was also a living stage. We're going to look into the bit more of the science behind how microbial, how to work with microbes, because microbes actually really like a lot of sound
Oh, they
and
do.
energy. They love to be shaken up. Yeah. So that's weird. That's why it's called pickle party, because the idea it's a party for the pickles, and the human together.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
it's a microbial party. Yeah.
Are any of the living stages filmed or online to watch, or is it just better to be there in person? Because I'm interested in seeing this pickle party, but I feel like I'm not going to get to Singapore.
It I Yeah, that's a very good point. We have been looking at a digital, so there can be a digital audience side to this as well, because theatre practice also works a lot with online digital theatre. So we have been thinking about that being a component. I think it's a bit too early to tell. The work won't be finished until I think it will be September next year. So we're
Mhm.
still a while away, a year and a half away or so from it being completed.
Yeah.
But yes, the idea of I think it's really important. Documentation for the living stages being quite important. So we do have some short films that are being made. The one I really like is the New York living stage, which was done with Superhero Clubhouse in New York and University Settlement. It was with fifth graders and elders from the local senior center. So it was intergenerational, and there's something very magical that happens when you have young people and elders together in a space. They just this community becomes alive in different ways. They really have a strong connection with one another. Yeah, it's so that was the focus of the living stage in New York,
And
and there's a
you said it
video
was
of that.
online. We can watch.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay, we'll have
it's
to get
most
that
things are
from
on
you.
the ecos. Yeah, most things are on the Ecoscenography website.
Perfect. Okay, so after all of this, right, I'm thinking about, changing the system and young people, whether it be from kindergartners to college students. So I'm wondering if you're teaching a design class and we'll just say in college, what would you assign? How would you bring the work from the living stage into a design classroom to inspire to create more Tanya Bears in the world? If
I
that's
think
possible. If that's possible.
I don't know, but I think it might be good to reference the class that I'm teaching at the moment, which is a first year class. We have our program is the Bachelor of Design. We have a general first year class for all students that are going into graphic design, product design, interior and spatial design. And they have to do a class with me called Form, Space and Process. And the thing that I've been integrating is really the what I call the 3 C's of ecoscenography, which is co-creation, celebration, and circulation. Co-creation in that we're using all reclaimed materials from the school. So I've basically been collecting all these old flyers and, brochures and magazines
Where are you
from
storing all
my own.
those?
I know it's sort of in, a mess in the corner really that my I have to say my fellow colleagues have been putting up with this kind of mess of materials in the corner. But it's all paper-based materials, card-based materials, so they're easily storable. It's all like the old posters from the graphic designers as well. They produce these big, A1, AO posters that never get seen again,
Yeah.
So we take all the old posters from the graphic design department. We take things that are being like anything that I see lying around that no one's using, I'm taking, right? So this is basically co-creating with place. Working from the premise is everything we need is right here. So we don't need anything else. We're basically just working with what's available right here, right now. So working from the premise that everything we need is already here is part of that co-creation. So the students are making wearable architecture at the moment. They're
Love it.
building these sculptural elements on the body using paper and card primarily. So we're going to have a fashion show next week. They have been inspired by the idea of the superhero or the super you idea. So that's been the impetus to create this wearable with fantastic superpowers that they're imagining. They're going to do a fashion parade. So we're going to transform the classroom into a fashion parade where we're going to celebrate these wearables. They're going to parade in them, and And then at the end of that, which is probably something that doesn't often get done enough in design class, is we're actually going to spend some time unmaking the
Unmaking.
design.
No,
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
never done that. That's amazing.
So this is the circulation side of ecosonography. So they're getting graded on this as well. So I said, this is beautiful. You've created this beautiful ephemeral art piece. Now we're going to unmake.
Hmm.
And they know that. They know that this is happening. So I said to them, we're designing already this with intention that you're not using hot glue, which was already a bit of like, oh, can't use hot glue. I said, we're going to attach where we can using staples, string. We can use a bit of masking tape, but that's the only things that you're allowed.
Right.
And then what we're going to do, we're going to systematically unmake everything. So deconstruct your wearable to then put back into reuse or recycling.
I love that.
I'm also asking
Great
them to do
idea.
a little yeah, yeah. I'm also asking them to do a little landfill pile. So they are going to document and photograph their unmaking. This is part of the process. And then they are also going to put a little pile together of all the things that are not recyclable or cannot be reused. So that's the masking tape, the staples, things like that. And they'll take a photograph of their landfill pile. And it's not about shaming at all in this process. It's like, let's just be upfront and honest about our process. What did we learn from that? And I want them to reflect on that and say, okay, well, actually, I used a lot more masking tape than I probably needed.
Mhm.
Or actually, I'm pretty happy with my landfill pile. I worked a lot with staples, and then it's quite actually given the difference between the recycling bin and what I've kind of got in my landfill pile. I'm pretty happy with that. So the deconstruction is also graded, and their reflection on that is important. So that is really the making and unmaking
Yeah.
process intertwined. And at first year level, they'll go into all different design fields, and we don't teach scenography in my course. So they're going to go into different elements of design, thinking about hopefully bringing that unmaking
I hope so.
sen- yeah, to what they do. And I've been doing that more and more now, because what
And
actually happens, as you might also experience as design educators, is that you have a whole bunch of stuff at the end. You make all the students are making something, there's a whole bunch of stuff at the end. And then you have to deal with it because students often don't come back and pick up the
yeah,
work, and
they just leave
students
it.
don't have anywhere to store the work.
Yeah,
So if you build in the unmaking, then, you also solve a problem for yourself as a design educator to then
that's
deal with
true.
all the things.
I'd like to see some fashion made with microbes for for your
Yes.
for your next
Yes.
performance.
I'm thinking about, this is a big part of thinking about the living stage with microbes, is potentially a SCOBY outfit. I'm not quite sure using
Ooh,
computer. Yes, I know. It could be interesting. I'm not sure. All of this is kind of still experimental.
well, maybe someone listening has some great ideas to help you or is an expert in that because that seems like something that needs to happen.
I would love somebody to reach out and tell me any tips for working with microbes as a designer.
Well, Tanya, it's been an amazing almost hour or so talking with you and learning about all your projects that you're doing. Where can we find you online if we want to learn more about the living stage and all your work?
So there's a great resource through the Ecoscenography website. So it's just ecoscenography.com. You can see examples of living stage projects there if you want to go and have a look. There's a little bit of information about ecosonography itself as a concept, a bit of information about my book as well. So I have written a book on ecosonography. So if you're interested
I
in
am.
delving into it further, that's also a really good resource, maybe one to put in the library for your students. I also have a little bit of a blog post which has an archive which has examples of other designers working in this space, and they are very inspiring. So there's some really great tangible examples with designers working across all theatre contexts, whether traditional or more expanded. So I would probably direct you to that website as a first point of call.
What's the name of your book for everyone to hear?
It's just called Ecosonography, An
Oh,
introduction to ecological design for performance. So yeah, if you Google ecoscenography, it will come up.
well, thank you, Tanya. It's been wonderful talking with you and learning more about what you do.
Thanks so much, Eric, for having me.
Well, I truly enjoyed talking with Tanya and Jacqui. Welcome back to our calls to action. This is
Yeah.
a part of the program where we do go into the conversation and unpack what the guest shared to provide some calls to action for our listeners. Jacqui, what was the big thing that you felt she was hoping we would hear in this discussion?
She had a couple notable moments. The first one is she encourages everyone to question the sustainability of their passions, which you've heard in the episode of how she started questioning and it unfolded that stage design was not very eco friendly. And she encourages all of us to kind of take that big step. Maybe there are hobbies, activities, maybe the community you're in is just not doing what they should be or could be doing for sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And as you heard in the episode, she started taking more initiative to try to change that, and she did. And it's
Yeah.
amazing to hear that.
Yeah, I think in embedded in that also was that there's still a lot of work to do,
Hmm.
especially in theater where she is, but everywhere, right?
Yeah,
And I think there is a call to action that it needs to go bigger, right?
it
This
does.
it does. And I know you and I talked about Hollywood. It should be happening in Hollywood as a place where there's a lot of climate impact that we don't see when we go to the film, but things explode, things get ruined, habitats get destroyed when making films. And that shouldn't be the case. There should be some Tanya Bear in
There should
in
be, yeah.
Hollywood. Yes.
Yeah, I think her level of theater design is out of this world, but and she has said that a lot of her counterparts are also doing great things. It has slowly crept its way up to Broadway, so we're getting there.
It's getting close.
Yeah, people are starting to reuse more, which, it really you can reuse a lot, like she said, in theater, a lot with the set design and stages and building those amazing contraptions. But there, like you said, is a lot to that can be done
Mhm.
in big Hollywood TV productions. Unfortunately, there's a lot of indigenous communities, minority communities that are forgotten and not treated with respect, especially when they're doing those fun movies that are tropical and out of this world because they're doing it in very tropical, small rural places where the community is just
True.
not respected.
True. Yeah. Well, a positive thing about that is this podcast will be coming out after this event, but from June 25th to June 28th, there's a Hollywood Climate Summit happening in Hollywood, hollywoodclimatesummit.com if you want to find out more information about that. So I guess there is some good work happening in that world, but it just needs to be more. And I think that was really evident in talking with Tanya.
Yeah, there you can always do more. Just because you've created something that was so amazing, like for her, the living stage, doesn't mean that that's the end. You can keep making and maybe it's just influencing and inspiring others. That's how you can keep going because you've done what you can and maybe what you're doing will create another Tanya Bear.
Yeah. And as an educator, Tanya, I think, was also giving a call to action to other educators in terms of this is a key thing, education. And on top of it, right, the educators need to educate themselves on this to better prepare the students of stage design or any field,
Mm.
right, to be a productive force for the world. So that was a big call to action that I embrace as an educator myself of there's always more I can do. There's always more I can learn. And hearing how she was doing stage design from a sustainable lens, I think was so refreshing a new perspective for me that I think I could bring into my design work, where I didn't think about some of the things that she talked about before. And now I feel, hey, I think I have a new perspective on things. Let me try this. So that was
Yeah.
really inspiring.
Yeah, and she really did face a lot of adversity at the beginning when she realized that her field could be doing more. Um,
Hmm.
and she really persevered, and she also wants the listener to know that everybody has power and has an agency of some sort, but we all convey it differently, and we shouldn't shame
Yeah.
others for using it differently. Some of us just like being more confrontational and that we like taking a more assertive route to it, but other
Yeah.
some of us don't. We're not comfortable with that. We like to take a more passive way or maybe really just focusing on what we can do individually, and
Hmm.
it's just as amazing as somebody who's doing more. It's everybody has a way that they can use their power as long as you're doing something.
Yeah. Well, that tied into, like, I think it was our third episode with Kobe Nasik earlier
Mhm.
on this season. And he talked about something similar in terms of what you could do for climate action. You don't have to be that protester in the streets if that doesn't feel right for you, right? You could be that person that brings those protesters food, or
Yeah.
is there for them when they're released from jail, I think was one of the other things he
Yeah.
said. But the skill sets that you have, the strengths of character you have, can all be relied upon to be a part of whatever path forward in climate that you want to take. And I think the thing for me that really, I'm not going to say that I think it's something that I knew and I felt before, but it was nice to hear it said, was if you feel comfortable speaking up, you should, right?
Mhm.
And that there's a level of power there that she talked about. Younger people in the field don't have that power
Mhm.
of any field, but the power that you have working longer can give you that increased comfortableness to speak up for others, to speak up for
Mhm.
positive change. So that was nice to hear, because I've definitely been thinking that a lot in my career as I've gotten older.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know you're younger in your career, so it may not feel the same way for you at this point.
Yeah, I've definitely struggled with the thoughts that I could be doing more, but I just don't have the enough under my belt. I'm using air quotes on that, under my belt to make a change, but you'll find your people, you'll find your community or your system that you fit into.
Hmm.
And like you said, we all have a part to play, whether you're the people that bring the food or you're on the front lines. Everybody is
Yeah.
important because like our season, a system is not going to work unless everybody does their part and what they feel like they
Hmm.
can contribute.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm doing what I can do for right now, and hopefully I can get to do more. And I'm sure maybe listeners can relate to that. Of I'd like to do more, but it's just one day at a time, one baby step at a time, because I can't take on the whole world
No,
in a day.
but you're on this podcast, right? So I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it's one step.
that's a step that wasn't in 2023. Well, it was great unpacking this episode with you, Jacqui. Another great guest, and a lot of inspirational words
Mhm.
from Tanya. Speaking of Tanya, where can we find Tanya Bear online?
If you want to see any of the amazing projects that she talked about and more, you can witness those set designs at her website, www.tanyabeer.com. But if you're interested to know more about ecoscenography and how it came to be, and all the elements that go into it, you can visit the website www.ecoscenography.com, and that's eco scenography.
Thanks for listening. And we want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? We also want to know how you are changing the system. Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Cam Berkins with writing and research by Abigail Zook, Jacqui Himmel, and Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Designed by Adam Java. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers and Tink Media for their sage advice to make this season even better than the last. You can find design prompts and more information on all our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers. Next week on Climify, we'll be joined by Michelle Moore. Michelle is author of the book Rural Renaissance and CEO of the nonprofit Groundswell. You can learn more about Groundswell at groundswell.org. Michelle is also a social entrepreneur and former White House official with roots in rural Georgia. Michelle is a relentless agent for change and currently serves as a Senate-confirmed member of the Tennessee Valley Authority Board of Directors.
I got a call. I was sitting in a meeting one day and I had this number came up on my cell phone. It just said 202. Didn't have the full telephone number on
202.
it. Just 202. I was like, oh my gosh. I was worried that my house alarm was full.
Right.
So I
Kind of
immediately
frightening.
picked it up in a panic. And the person on the other end said, this is so-and-so with the White House. And for the role as federal environmental executive, there were a few folks who had recommended that they reach out to me. And I was surprised, extraordinarily surprised, and humbled and honored to get that call. And tremendously honored to serve as well. And regardless of what role you have or in what administration, it is public service.
Yeah.
It's public service. You're serving all of the people, whether they like you or not, whether they like your boss or not, and trying every day to make the best decisions that you can for the public good.